Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to our regular session meeting for December. We will have the moment of silence and pledge led by Ms. Bounds.
Please stand. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we just have a few announcements before we begin. We have Farragut High School teacher Wendy Love and Fulton High School teacher Caitlin Sadler joining us electronically this evening, and we will be recognizing both of these outstanding educators a little later in our meeting, and we are appreciative that they are here. Thank you for joining us. As we have reviewed during the last several meetings, our mission statement is to provide excellent and accessible learning opportunities that empower all students to realize their full potential. So just wanted to remind everyone of our mission statement. Also, as we noted during last week's work session, the CDC I'm not sure if we knew this exactly during the last session, but anyway, the CDC has changed the guidelines moving away from the 14-day quarantine period, and my hope is that this will allow us to better meet the needs of our students and continue to make opportunities that are part of our overall mission accessible to our students. And tonight, Knox County Health Department Director Dr. Martha Buchanan is here with us this evening, and she'll be providing an update and taking some questions after the special recognition. So we appreciate her taking the time to be here this evening. If you look at the agenda, board members, you have received an email notice about a change to the term dates on the agreement with DBQ project being considered as item AC3. Both the caption and attached documentation have been updated. And that was the only change that we had to our agenda. Do we have other changes to this agenda? Requested changes. Mr. Watson?
Yes, I would ask that the board consider adding as an item 12B to have a discussion about the possibilities of us moving to virtual meetings if the governor extends his order 65 past December 27th.
Okay, do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any other changes? Okay, all in favor for this addition?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and then any additional changes requested to the agenda? Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Mr. Watson. Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. And now I would like to refer to Superintendent Thomas, who will take care of our recognitions. Thank you, Superintendent.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Warren. Tonight I'd like to say a few words about three of our outstanding teachers who recently earned important distinctions. The first two teachers are joining us virtually, as Mrs. Horn indicated, so hopefully you can see them on the screen. Wendy Love is an art teacher at Farragut High School, and earlier this year she was honored by the Tennessee Art Education Association as its Special Needs Art Educator of the Year for 2021. Mrs. Love has been at Farragut High School since 1999 and has worked for Knox County Schools for 28 years. In addition, Caitlin Sadler was recognized by the TAEA as its East Region Art Educator of the Year for 2021. Ms. Sadler has been a teacher at Fulton High School for 8 years and has worked for the district for 10 years. The TAEA's mission includes advancing quality visual arts instruction, and the winners in its awards programs are nominated by other members of the organization. The arts are an extremely important part of the educational experience at Knox County Schools, and I am so grateful to Mrs. Love and Mrs. Seidler for their commitment to students. So please join me in congratulating Wendy Love and Caitlin Seidler. And we have a couple recognitions there we'll send to you. Make sure that you get those. So thank you for joining us virtually this afternoon. And I don't know if anyone wants to say anything.
Ms. Love, did you want to say hello? We're glad you could join us this afternoon. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, and I think in person with us is Mrs. Marcia Southern. Marcia, yes, okay, yeah, who's an English and Social Studies teacher at Kelly Academy. In November, she was honored as this year's Simon Youth Foundation Teacher of the Year. As many of you know, the Simon Youth Foundation has been an important partner for Kelly Academy and plays a key role in that school's mission of providing an alternative path for students who are struggling academically. In announcing this award, the foundation praised Ms. Southern for tailoring instruction to meet each student's needs and for caring about her students as individuals. Our district wants to ensure that all students have the opportunity for academic success, and Ms. Southern is a perfect example of that commitment. This is a well-deserved honor, so please join me in congratulating Marcia Southern. If you would come forward, I'd like to get a picture.
Thank you so much for being here this evening, and it's always fun to be able to recognize our teachers.
Oh, and let me say one other thing, too. Mrs. Southern was awarded a check for $2,000, too, so
Yay.
I think she said she was donating that back to Knox County Schools. No, I guess not. Okay. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Superintendent Thomas. Okay, and now, Ms. Coatney, we'll have the reading of the agenda items, please.
Item 8, consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Ms. Satterfield. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
9A, approve second reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy I-381, integration of TCAP and EOC scores in student grades as amended.
So moved.
We have a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Ms. Christie. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry, Betsy, I didn't even see that. Excuse me if you'll pause.
I hope I'm doing this correctly. I don't know. I have heard from several members of our community that were a little disappointed that these rules weren't in place prior to when the testing began. I also agree. I don't feel like it was fair for teachers or the students. And just going forward, maybe that's something that we can look into doing in a more timely manner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think that, the state board didn't approve it until November 6th. And I don't know exactly what our dates were for our November meetings, but looking back, we should have done first and second reading in November, and we didn't do that, and so we should have. That's what my view of it. And so I think that we just didn't do that. We should have. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so we had a motion and a second by Ms. Owen and Ms. Christie. Do we have any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
9B, approve first reading of Knox County Board of Education Policy J201, random searches for dangerous weapons as amended.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Ms. Babb. Discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10A, approve State of Tennessee Department of Education Safe Schools Grant for 2020-2021 in the amount of $1,522,165.25 with required matching funds of $476,700 that will be provided by in-kind services from the Knox County Sheriff's Office and Knoxville Police Department.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10B, approve receipt of State of Tennessee Department of Education Local Education Agency Reopening and Programmatic Supports Grant in the amount of $125,000.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Ms. Owen. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10C, approve agreement with the City of Knoxville for Knox County's participation in a Community-Oriented Policing Services 2020 Stop School Violence Grant in the amount of $464,624 with required local match of $116,156 to enhance the safety of Knox County students through ongoing training, school site safety improvements, and technological upgrades.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Ms. Babb. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10D, approve U.S. Department of Justice Patrick Leahy Bulletproof Vest Partnership Grant for the reimbursement of 50% of body armor purchases up to $6,081.78.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie. I think the second was by Ms. Owen. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10E, approve license agreement with Rosetta Stone and receipt of $5,000 grant for Westview Elementary School designated to support emerging English learners.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Satterfield, a second by Ms. Owen. Questions? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
10F, approve Dow Chemical Company grant in the amount of $1,000 for Westview Elementary School designated to the purchase of student folders, supplies, and car magnets.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Satterfield, a second by Ms. Owen. Discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
11A, approve contract with College Board for provision of an advanced academics program for the term of November 1, 2020 through October 31, 2023, which may be extended for 2 additional years for a total of 5 years.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Ms. Babb. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
11B, approve contracts with Epson America Incorporated, Novatech Incorporated, and Risso Incorporated for provision of high-speed printers for the term of January 1, 2021 through June 30, 2021, which may be extended for an additional 5 years, 1 year at a time, for a total of 5 years and 6 months at an estimated cost of $1,226,658 annually.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Mr. Watson. Mr. McMillan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. It says that it could go up to 5 years. It has to come back before the board. It doesn't automatically go. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. McMillan, actually, no, I mean, the way these have been set up, Mr. McMillan, is that once the board approves it with this language, Well, I mean, just so I'm clear, I mean, legally, there's no issues with it, but if your concern is finances, I mean, that's not my department. I mean, that's Ron McPherson's department. Ron, did you want to say something about it?
I can. Yes, one thing we are expecting is when these went out to bid, it came back actually 175. We expect it's going to end up about 175,000 less per year. So in that 5.5-year time frame, if that's what we elect to do, it's upwards of, we anticipate of a cumulative $1 million savings by doing this. Okay. If we wanted to bring it back, and I would have to yield to Mr. Dupler on this. It would have to be, if we decided to go into another direction, it would have to be rebid and again, right? I mean, if the board, you know, if the board chose to, if this needed to be, I guess, approved, if in the event it were not approved, then we would be in a little bit of a bind in trying to get all the printers replaced. We'd have to rebid, but I'll yield to Gary on that one.
Well, what would happen is, I mean, so this will be good for a year. Or a year and 6 months, however, let me see, January to June.
Yeah, it's annually for a year. This is additional 6 months because of that initial 6 months delay.
So you're getting, you know, your first part, and I mean that wouldn't be changed if either the administration or the board at some point in the 5 years says, hey, we don't want to continue this, they can do that. But then at that point, you're right. I mean, the contract would have to be rebid. So, you know.
Okay. Thank you. I think you've answered my questions. If it'll save that much money and you all are comfortable with it, then I feel much better. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Mr. McPherson, you've already gotten this answer to me, but just for the public record, how many devices is this? How many?
It'll be 189 devices to replace on a one-to-one basis.
Which is a little more than $6,000 per device.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, but these are not what you would have on your desk at home.
No.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
11C, approve agreement to purchase of internet access and related services with Education Networks of America, LLC, through a Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools contract at an estimated cost of $420,000 for the funding year 2021-2022, with an option to renew through June 30th, 2024.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Ms. Christie. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
11D, approve contracts with Bonnets Incorporated and Skilled Services Quality Construction LLC for provision of floor tile installation services for the term of December 10, 2020 through December 9, 2021, which may be extended for an additional 4 years, 1 year at a time, for a total of 5 years up to $200,000 annually.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Christie, a second by Mr. Watson. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, and now I said that Dr. Buchanan was going to go after our recognitions and promptly forgot, and so we were halfway through approving these agenda items. So Dr. Buchanan, I apologize. Completely slipped my mind. So if you would, go ahead and come on, and then this will be at the beginning of our regular agenda items, and then we'll move into our legislative priorities after we have this discussion. So thank you very much for being here this evening. We really appreciate it. And I know probably we have a lot of questions among us. I'm sure that probably one of the most pressing is regarding the information that you announced yesterday with quarantine protocols and that kind of conversation. And I know since we've met, the days for protocol or the quarantining has changed a little bit. So if you'll just kind of bring us up to speed, and then if you would take some questions, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and come before this board. And thank you for what you do to keep our kids in school and educate our children. Just first, just some numbers. Today we had 337 new cases. Yesterday we had the most new cases we've had. We had over 400. It was about 450. We're averaging about 300 new cases a day now, maybe a little bit more than that. So COVID has really taken off since the last time I was before you, and our new cases have really gone up. Partially a result of, we believe, the Thanksgiving holidays and folks gathering and not wearing their masks and doing those things. Currently, we have 140 Knox County citizens in the hospital. That's the most is it? That's correct. It's the most we've had for Knox County citizens. And we're up to 195 deaths at this point of Knox County citizens. That's not a regional number. Those are Knox County citizens. We are averaging about 63. We have 63 cases per 100,000 population, and there is our 14-day average. That's very high. When you think about the Board of Health, their marker for escalating is 10 cases per 100K, so we're quite a bit higher than that. And our percent positivity is over 20%, so 22.6%, and that's quite a bit higher. Again, 10% is the cutoff for doing other things for the Board of Health, so we're quite a bit above that as well. And so, yeah, now I'll get to the changes. The CDC recommended some changes in a couple of different areas, and Tennessee Department of Health has decided to adopt those, and we also are adopting those here locally. So first, the change is prioritizing contact tracing and case investigations. So prioritizing those that are most likely to have the most impact. So we will be doing contact tracing and case investigations on all of the cases that get reported to us within 6 days of their testing. So if they come to us after 6 days, we won't investigate them. We won't reach out to those folks. Partly because they're kind of at the end of their isolation period and there's less that we can do. And we've said this many times, at this level of community transmission, contact tracing is less effective than it is earlier on in an outbreak. The exception to that rule will be people over the age of 60 because of their risk for complications and death, and people under 18. We really feel like helping control cases in the schools and in our families is important, and also other congregate settings like long-term care. So there are some exceptions, but we'll be doing less. So some people won't be called by us at all, but they're COVID cases. So it's really important if you think you have COVID, you need to follow the isolation guidelines, and we've got some calculators for people who need to know how long to quarantine and stuff on our website. So that's one of the changes, and that just helps us focus on higher risk folks and places where transmission can occur in congregate type settings. Then the other change is a change in quarantine. Again, that came from the CDC. 14 days is still the ideal time to quarantine. Your risk of becoming a case of COVID-19 after that is 0. If you do not have symptoms, you can quarantine for just 10 days. Your risk of developing symptoms and becoming a case of COVID at that point is about 1%, so a little more risky for the community. And then if you have no symptoms and you have a test within 2 days of the 7 days, either a PCR or an antigen test that's negative, you can then come out of quarantine. There's about 12% chance that you will go on to become a case of COVID, so you still need to monitor yourself and kind of take it easy and not, go to a big party or anything like that. We're kind of discouraging that activity anyway right now. So those are changes. The thought being that backing off on quarantine and allowing some people some flexibility will do a couple of things. One, we hope it will improve compliance. It's hard to quarantine for 14 days. It's hard to quarantine for 10 days. It's disruptive, and we know that, and the CDC is hoping that we'll have better compliance with that. It also helps people get back to work or back to school sooner. So that's a good thing. People need to be on the job. They need to be earning a paycheck, putting food on the table, and kids need to be in school. So we're hoping those two things will be positive changes. So those are kind of my updates. I'm happy to take any questions from you about anything you might have questions about.
Ms. Babb?
Yeah, I just want a little clarification. When you're talking about the contacts tracing of 60-year-old, is it like if I have COVID, but I've been around someone that's 60, or older, you'll contact them, or is it the fact if I'm over 60? I'm a little confused about
Okay.
on the contact tracing.
So it's really the cases. So if the case is over 60, we're going to do a case investigation, which also includes contact tracing. Within the contact tracing, we will also be prioritizing groups at higher risk. So if somebody in that 60-year-old's life works at a long-term care, we're going to notify that person. If the 60-year-old has a buddy he plays cards with who's 40, we might not notify the 40-year-old. We'll ask him to notify the 40-year-old. So it's just a kind of a change. So when I say younger than 18 and older than 60, those are the cases. Okay. Sorry. Thanks for that question.
Okay, Ms. Satterfield,
Go ahead.
Ms. Satterfield.
Yeah, could you just repeat the 7-day and 2-day testing aspect again? I missed
Sure.
it.
So if you're asymptomatic and you have a negative test that was obtained either on day 5 or 6 before day 7, you can come out of quarantine on day 8. Yes, ma'am. And again, we've got calculators on our website that are going to help people figure this out because I've said it a bunch of times and I still sometimes get confused.
Okay. Before we go to Ms. Bounds, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, the antigen test, so basically, like I had a call yesterday from a parent and their question was, I believe that was their question, if their child shows that they have had COVID, then could they not quarantine?
And I think you're talking about the antibody test.
Okay, so is this two
Very
different things?
Different thing, yes.
Two different things. Okay, so,
Antigen tells you current infection.
Okay.
Antibody tells past infection. But
Okay.
it does, now the important thing about antibody test, and it's not just true for COVID antibody tests are a challenge to interpret. An antibody test for COVID does not tell you anything about the immunity of that person to COVID. We just don't know enough about COVID yet. So you can have a positive antibody test that tells us you had COVID at some point and you have an antibody, but the antibody may not be protective. So just an antibody positive result does not get you out of quarantine because you may still be vulnerable to the disease.
okay. And then one other question, and then I promise, Ms. Mounds, I'll come to you. I know the CDC's recommendation is what played into your thinking on tracing the kids and then the older population. But when you look at, like if I look at the data that breaks it down by age on the website, it says that cases per 10,000 for 0 to 17 is 255. And so it's the lowest of the age groups. So why?
We want to keep it that way.
Okay, but if you're trying to not spread it, it seems like you would do the 18 to 44 because that's the highest. And it seems like adults are passing it to each other much more quickly than children. So
that's based on data that honestly I don't have that the CDC has. They made those recommendations based on congregate settings and the risk of passing something. The more people you add together in a room, the more likely you are to pass COVID. And so those are based on those recommendations from the CDC.
okay. Ms. Bounds?
Thank you, Ms. Thorne. And thank you, Dr. Buchanan, for being here tonight. And a lot has transpired since the last time you appeared before this board. But and let me go back, because I don't know if the board realizes or not, but congratulations. Dr. Buchanan was named the Powell High School Woman of the Year, Distinguished Woman of the Year for the Alumni Association. So up until that point, I did not realize you were a graduate of Powell High School. So congratulations on that. So first, as I recall, Mr. McMillan asked about the possibility of shortening the days quarantined at the last meeting from 14 to 10, and this idea was rejected, and the comments on social media were, needless to say, very ugly, nasty, and mean. However, now that the CDC has recommended, the Tennessee Department of Health and the Board of Health has adopted this CDC guidelines and shortened the quarantine period to 10 days and 7 with a negative test, I just want to acknowledge Mr. McMillan for being very forward-thinking and realize that some of those nasty comments were unwarranted. And then at the last meeting, Ms. Horn referenced Putnam County School Board that was no longer involving the health department in their contact tracing of their students and had seen no increase or difference in the number of cases. So I'm glad that we are, even though I, like Ms. Horn, would like to see a different demographic targeted, but I am happy that we are limiting that contact tracing, because at the last meeting I referenced the emails that I'd received from multiple parents about delayed notifications, and I think I sent you an email after that where it was stated we were notified 8 days after close contact. So at this point, my son had been around probably 100 plus people over Halloween, weekend school, ball game practices, etc. And you did go back, and I wanted to commend you for that, and check with your staff, and then responded to me on November 16th that after speaking with your staff, it was likely due to the current lab turnaround time. And at that time, it was 5 to 7 days, you said, to get lab results across the community, and that means contacting the case and then the contacts as soon as we can after that. You were hoping that would get better, but the caseload has gone up, and so in fact, it hasn't gotten better, because after I tested positive for COVID, I was contacted on day 10 of a 10-day quarantine by the Knox County Health Department, asking a lot of contact questions about contact tracing and that sort of thing. But that was 12 days after I had exposed people to that without symptoms and not knowing that I had COVID. So by that time, I would assume most of those people that I was in close contact with 12 days later would have either shown symptoms, gotten the disease, been over the disease, whatever. So fortunately, responsibly, I contacted all those people. They did the mandatory 14-day quarantine period and all of that. But and lastly, I would just like to say I understand the severity of this disease, and we've lost some very close friends. But I'm personally thankful to have tested positive now, because I feel like I do have better immunity than even possibly the vaccine can offer, and feel like that I do have some level of immunity and probably am at a do not pose an extreme risk to others as well. So anyway, I don't expect any apologies from all those nasty, mean comments on social media, but I do think it's up to the board to ask questions, and you've been very good to come before this board and answer them and try to update the information. And none of us know, to be honest. I mean, we can read all we want to read on it, but it's still a very unknown factor out there. So thank you for all you've done, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the vaccine. It sounds like possibly we're getting some here soon, and I was talking to Scott Bolton, our HR person, about prioritization, and I did see at some level teachers are in the priority list, and so I'm trying to make sure that's true. And then with the dosing that you're expecting coming in and stuff, when do we even sort of see that happening, that possibly teachers might be eligible to get vaccines?
So,
if you know.
yeah, that's the great unknown. We will be getting some vaccine. I don't know exactly how much yet. There are estimates of how much, but I won't count those until we have them in our hot little hands and we know exactly how much we have. Having been through several flu seasons and flu mists, you guys have been around for flu mists, you know, sometimes it's like stop and start because the vaccine supply is not always as reliable as we'd like it to be. So the first one, the 1A, yeah, it's like 1A, 1B, and 1A2 or something. That's all first responders, ER employees,
Nursing home residents.
Nursing home residents. They just got added in long-term care workers. So that's the first group. And we'll be vaccinating those folks probably for the next couple of months, to be quite honest. I think that teachers will be in the, what do they call it, critical infrastructure group, I think. The other group that's there are the nurses that work in the schools and the healthcare people at UT that provide care for the students, and like if anybody else has a clinic, any other educational facility. So I think teachers will be in like the B group of critical infrastructure, but that's going to be determined at the state level by the Unified Command Group and the governor.
Okay.
So I don't have that information yet, but I think they're in that second tier of the first tier.
And I guess, I mean, it's all going to depend on number of doses that we're getting and how.
It is. It's all going to depend on availability and how quickly it actually comes out, and how much we get, and uptake. That's the other piece is, if we get 2,000 doses and, we're able to satisfy everybody in the first responder group with those 2,000 doses and have some left over, we'll move on to the next group.
Okay.
Because it's totally voluntary, unless employers make it mandatory, which employers certainly can do that, but it'll be voluntary, and we'll be working hard to get that information out so people are aware. And but I think teachers will stay in that critical infrastructure group, but I'm not going to guarantee that because I don't have any input into that.
Well, I really hope they do. I mean,
I do
obviously,
too.
I don't want to be in a group that's forcing anybody to get a vaccine that they don't feel comfortable with. But I do think we are trying to educate our students. And I mean, obviously, I think healthcare workers come first, but I do think the teachers need to be pretty high up on the list. And so I hope that at the state level, they will continue to consider them that way.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
Ms. Christie?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for being here, and also to your staff. I know you all are incredibly busy, but they always seem to make time to answer the questions that I've had or some of my parents have had. And as well as Ms. Wagner and Mr. Myers on the KCS staff, they've all, as busy as everything is, I have to say, they do respond quickly when people do have concerns.
Yeah, I have, my team is amazing, and they continue to step up every time, over and over again, for our community.
Mr. Watson?
Yes, I just wanted to echo some of the comments that have already been made. I really appreciate the Knox County Health Department acting in good faith. You came before us in September and again just last month to say that you would be continually looking at the CDC guidance in the state of Tennessee and the state of Tennessee Health Department. And so I appreciate the deference in which you've treated that and been engaging continually, even outside of those conversations with our KCS staff ever since the beginning of the pandemic. So I appreciate you all doing that, and also want to echo Ms. Bound's comments about nasty emails being sent to Mike. Brother, nobody ever deserves that. It does. The reality is, everybody's feeling strong things, and we still need to lift one another up and honor one another during that time. So I hate that happened.
Thank you. And I know, Dr. Buchanan, from watching your press conference yesterday, I know that there's a concern that there are a lot of, this is really just as an aside, not for school system, but that there are a lot of people who need to go to the hospital who are not going to the hospital because they're concerned about COVID, or they think there's no room for them. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because that's a serious issue for people whose cancer is not being addressed, or whose heart issues are not being addressed.
Right. So the hospitals are busy. I'm not going to
But
say
they
they're
always
not.
are this time of the year.
They are,
right?
But they have plans, and they're activating those plans to free up space so that they can care for COVID and non-COVID patients. They want to continue to be able to provide a high level of care. I heard on the way over here that Covenant just announced they're stopping elective procedures that require an overnight hospital stay. So that'll free up some beds and staff to take care of whoever needs the care that they need. So they've only just begun to activate their surge plans. All their surge plans look slightly different because all of them look slightly different from each other. But they're literally meeting every day to talk about capacity and what the needs are and what do we need to do next. So our hospitals are working together. We're very fortunate. That doesn't always happen. They compete in lots of ways, but in this situation, they're working together. And so I feel comfortable. If I had a need and needed to go to the hospital, I would go to the hospital. You're probably going to wait a while, but frequently the waits are high anyway in these days. And hospitals run at pretty full capacity, so they're able to accommodate the needs of the patients that come see them.
Thank you. That's important. I just thought
It is important.
We have another audience that may not have heard that information, so that's important to say. One other question that goes back to a comment Ms. Bounds made, and I know you referenced it, I believe, yesterday in listening to you speak about the turnaround time on testing. That's been an issue, and you know, in thinking about the impact of just, do you expect it to continue to be an issue?
Honestly, I do.
Okay.
I think two things contribute to that. One is the sheer volume of testing. As our cases go up, more people are getting tested. I mean, we tested 450, I think, today. So testing volume is going up, and not just at the health department, but across the board. The other thing is, honestly, the reporting system is just overwhelmed. And so what has to happen is the result, you know, has to get completed, and then the result goes to the state lab into the reporting system and then comes to us. And so sometimes we're getting called by a patient before we ever hear from the state about that I tested positive, what do I do? So that system is just overwhelmed by the volume, and so that's slowing it down as well. So the lab turnaround time, add to that the system, and so that's why we're saying to everybody, if you get tested for COVID, it is really, whether you have symptoms or not, no matter why you get tested, you need to quarantine until you get test results. So that means stay home. Don't accidentally expose people. When you get test results, if you're negative, you're good to go. If you're positive, then you've got, you know, you've got your isolation period. But it's important for people to stay home if they've been tested until they get those test results, so that they don't accidentally expose people, because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to make their friends sick. So.
Thank you.
Yes,
Any
ma'am.
other questions or comments? We really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Cody?
Item 12A, approve legislative priorities of the Knox County Board of Education for 2021.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Owen, a second by Ms. Satterfield. Mr. Watson?
I would like to offer a friendly motion
Okay.
to approve the recommended changes before the board as in hard copy.
Okay, I think everybody has a hard copy. If you'll take a few minutes to read that. Okay,
I'm happy to give some understanding about why I'm suggesting this change if
Okay.
that's needed.
go ahead.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is obviously the first time that I've been through this and don't have a lot of history with legislative priorities. I appreciate the discussion at the last meeting talking about the intent and the need to get to a set of priorities that we as a board cohesively can lift up before our legislators. That being said, I think just in terms of procedure, I think it's, to me, it's just interesting from an approval standpoint that we approve them all as one, because obviously each individual ones of us may have very strong feelings about certain ones of these over others. I'm not suggesting that we adjust the procedure tonight, but I think in the future it'd be good to look at doing that, because I don't think a no vote should indicate to the public that somebody doesn't believe any of this, nor should I think a yes vote should indicate that a person believes in all of this. So in referencing the specific changes that I'm suggesting, under the school voucher section, the Knox County Board of Education, I just, for consistency throughout the document, we continue to reference the Knox Board of Education, and I thought it would be good to just make that consistent. I also want to say, too, that I had nothing to do with drafting the original version of this, nor did I want to, and so I'm extremely grateful for all those. I'm sure Ms. Owen and Mr. Thomas and others have had a tremendous amount of input in this over many, many, many years, and so I'm not here to presume to be an expert, but under teacher performance evaluation, and I know that just by bringing this up, I'm stepping into tricky waters, I'm suggesting that we add the language right after Knox County Board of Education to maintains high standards for teachers. And the reason I say that is because that's obvious, we do. But I think one of the arguments, just in my limited time in the space between legislators, is around accountability, and that sometimes there's this feeling that people don't expect high standards from teachers, which to me is a ridiculous thing. And that's why people say they push for accountability so much, because we have to maintain high standards. So I thought it would be good for us just to put it out there that, yes, we do maintain high standards. And then when I first read this, I honestly thought we were trying to do what we did up above around the BP, around hold harmless due to COVID. And so just jumping to the end of that, I think even though we approved a resolution, I think this is another opportunity to elevate that conversation around holding teachers harmless related to state testing data for the 2021 school year. And then within the lines of the 15 years of research has shown that student scores do not accurately measure teacher performance or effectiveness. I actually reviewed a lot of those studies this past week, and I'll tell you it was interesting. I actually looked for and could not find any studies that said that we need to be evaluating state test scores at 50% of a teacher's evaluation. I just couldn't find the research out there that said that, and I looked for it. I did find at least 5 studies that said we do not need to be doing that, but I didn't find any studies, frankly, that said we should not consider state testing at all. And the reason that I suggested that we strip teacher evaluation scores should be decoupled from student testing and moved it down to the hold harmless section is because I think common sense tells us that if a student is performing well, it likely has something to do with teacher effectiveness. So I'm not saying that it needs to be weighted at 50% or that, our teacher evaluation calculations are absolutely crazy, and I've read through a lot of those. But I think to say they should have nothing to do with a teacher's evaluation probably isn't accurate either. And so I think the only thing that I was really concerned about is the language around decoupling, that it's completely separate. And I know there's strong opinions about this, and I'm not an expert, but from my brief reading of the research, I couldn't go as far as decoupling. So.
Okay. Ms. Owen?
If Dr. Riswick would be so kind, if you would just remind us how value-added scores work and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do you know what I'm saying? And what those scores actually mean? I think that would be helpful to this discussion.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Owen. I'm probably not the most qualified. I would much rather Steve Rutter and somebody from our REA department do that, but I'll take a shot at those.
The way you say it is always exactly perfect.
Okay. So I think what's interesting is for a long time, I think value added people were like 5s are better than 1s, right? And so I think that was that perception of you're doing better if you have a 5 than a 1. And really what it tells is it's the certainty with which people know the year's worth of growth happened. So if you're a 3, 4, or 5, that typically means a teacher or a school or a district has enough data points so they feel very strongly that year of growth took place. 1 or 2, they feel like there's enough data points to say that you potentially didn't make that full year of growth. So if you score a 3, that usually means that there wasn't enough to say there was total proof of that or total proof not of that. And lots of times people think, well, a 3 is better than a 1. Well, it could just be there's not enough sample size in that. So really what it's saying is the certainty with which that happened, and you're much more certain with a score of a 5 than obviously the score of a 4. So that's kind of what it looks at. And sometimes it's sample size of the number of kids who are tested for an individual teacher.
And so we're basing our teacher evaluation scores on a number that says the degree of certainty rather than the degree that they were effective.
Correct. On the value-added portion is correct. The achievement is a little different, but yes, that is on the value-added side of that. So
does that explain why they're not valid?
Could you speak to the growth portion?
Sorry.
Could you speak then to the growth? I mean, you've talked about the value added, so could you? Speak
right. So the value added would be the growth component. The achievement would be the strength.
Oh, that's what I mean.
Correct. Yeah. So the achievement would be, those are scores, and the way they do that can't believe I'm doing this. Really, Steve Rudder needs to be doing this. But but the way they do that on is everyone is ranked in a grade and across the state. So there's always going to be winners and losers. You think of it that way. So it's not a cut score that you could have 90% of the state above a certain level, because you're always going to rank everybody, all third graders that took the same test in the state, and then there's a rank order. That's why there's always a bottom 5%, right, in every one of those things. So, and given year to year, you can see those, but
It's a moving target.
It is. It's not the same cohort of kids that come into that, but it really is a true achievement against like peers. Well, like peers may be an exaggeration. It is a true score against like all other third graders that took the test in the state of Tennessee, when you look at those kinds of things. So that's set on achievement that way. I don't know if that helps or if that was what you were looking for. Okay.
It does. And Dr. Reisig, I appreciate your explanation about the value-added models, which, and I forgot to address this, but I did add language related to that. Obviously, one of the struggles with value-added models is they don't account for a tremendous amount of other variables. You may have one teacher that's teaching this set of kids this year, and then this next year they're teaching a totally different set of kids in a totally different school. And there's a lot of environmental factors that might influence the value-added portion of that person's evaluation. Is that true?
No, that is true. And sometimes what we see in our schools that have been historically lower performers is that they tend to be able to make some gains in that growth, because they're moving off the baseline that's here. They can have a good year and their growth may show where their overall achievement may not. You'll see that sometimes in schools that struggle in that. But yeah, it is different cohorts every year, not the same kid. We can look at a kid longitudinally, and that's how they make projections for the following years for the grades they move up. But for a teacher who just teaches third grade, it is a different cohort that comes through every time, every year.
Has there been any change in the percentage of teachers who have to rely on data from other classes, from classes they don't teach? I know that long ago, like 2012, it was about 60% of our teachers were scored by tests that were not their subject area. So there was no test. There's no part of the TCAP that's going to test my music class. But my score is going to be based on how they did in the classes they are tested on. Do we know if that percentage is
Just
still
enough to not get dangerous, and then it may be a Scott Bolton question for sure on numbers. So you are correct. So if there's not a state test for that grade level or that subject area, well, that grade level, stay in elementary or K8 or 3-8, then they typically do have another measure they pick, that's the school-wide measure that they may or may not have direct control over as far as it goes, a school overall score and that sort of thing. As far as how many we have in that may be Scott. Oh, there you are. Sorry, Scott. He may have a better shot at that than me.
And I think my 60% was generally across the state, so I'm not looking for a hard number.
Madam Chair, the rest of the board. Honestly, I'll have to get those numbers for you to be exact, because I'm not for sure off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Okay, so we need, yeah. So we currently have a substitute or a friendly amendment.
A friendly amendment.
Okay, so Ms. Owen made the motion. Did she? Who made the motion?
I did.
Ms. Owen. Ms. Owen made the motion.
And Miss Ebony, Miss
And Ms.
Satterfield.
Satterfield seconded it. So, Ms. Owen, before we go on to more conversation, are you willing to accept the friendly amendment or not?
I'm good with all of it except limiting all of this to the 2021 school year.
Can I make a clarifying statement? My intent with the whole teacher harmless section is operating as a separate piece of that. To me, there's two statements. There's the overall legislative priority around teacher performance evaluation, and then there is, and the same thing we did with the VEP section, there was the bullet point around holding harmless with VEP, that this particular year, the other reason why I think it's important to call that out is I think legislators are going to be more sensitive to that this year. And I think it's important to elevate that in the conversation and not try to tackle, not that we shouldn't try to tackle the bigger issue, but we certainly need to get the fruit we can get. And I think it's important to spell that out for the same reason I assume we did for the BEP funding section that talks about holding harmless.
Ms. Owen, are you agreeable to that?
I don't feel good limiting it to this year, so whatever the board decides, I'll go with, but I don't feel good.
Can you
with
pull
that.
your microphone? I just
I'm
can't-
sorry. I'm saying that I don't feel good with the limitation of just this year. I will go with whatever the board decides, of course, but I don't feel good with that.
Ms. Owen,
Well,
can you specify the piece that you're saying is limited to this year? What specific phrase are you saying?
No bearing on individual teacher evaluations for the 2021 school year.
Okay. Can I make it a substitute motion?
You can?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you have a anyone want a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second for the substitute motion. So what the hard copy that you're presented with now is a substitute motion. And I don't know who had their mic down first.
Well, now, wait a minute.
Well,
What
Mr. McMillan?
is the substitute motion? Is this,
This is now, yes, this
All
is the
of this.
substitute motion that we are discussing.
okay.
Not that I'm not friendly toward Ms. Owen. I'm still friendly toward Ms. Owen, I just want to say that.
So,
What you're wanting to do is just do it for this 1 year?
No, maybe it's just the way I have it worded. I think there's some confusion about my intent. My intent is to say, is to elevate. I think we have a real chance of getting the legislature to act on decoupling, the way it was originally worded, test scores from teachers' evaluations for this year. And I think as a Board of Education, if we believe that should happen, then I think we need to elevate that in the conversation. And so my intent is to try to get the gains that we can. And my intent is not to try to make not to try to say that particular section is something that we would keep on here forever, but would need to be reevaluated with time, so.
well, and, if I may, I think that during these times, I think that legislators are going to be focused on COVID issues, They're not going to think beyond that right now. So I'm not sure that, I'm not sure it would matter if we were asking for something different. I don't think they're going to address it right now because they're going to be focused on COVID. And just so everybody knows this, I spoke with Representative Zachary this afternoon, and the governor is considering, he's evaluating whether to have a special session before the session begins. So when they go back into session on the second Tuesday of January, it may be, they're just discussing, I think, but it may be that they hold a special session to consider education issues so that these issues that we're discussing can be addressed sooner rather than later. So hopefully they will do that, and hopefully our teachers then would know what the ramifications are for them. So, Mr. McMillan, did you have anything else for the moment?
Well, I want to make a comment, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Bab.
well, and I talked to Mr. Dupler about this, so I don't know parliamentary-wise, do I need to wait for this to finish to bring up what I want to bring up? I mean, I'll say it. I just don't know parliamentary how to do it.
Parliamentary-wise, you can make another substitute, or you can make an amended motion.
Well,
we can stack them.
Yeah, okay, because this goes back to something Mr. Watson said originally in.
Point of order.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you have another substitute motion without voting on the one that's already on the floor?
Well,
it has been my understanding that you had to dispense with that one and then before you went to another. Now, he could pull his back if he wishes, but you can't have two at the same time, I don't believe. Now, I might be wrong. It's been a long time since I've dealt with that issue.
Well, one could ask to amend the substitute, which would basically have the same effect. I think you're right as far as you can't have two substitutes, but one could ask to amend the substitute. But right now, until we have that motion, the board can only discuss the substitute motion.
Exactly.
Okay, so do you have something relative to the substitute motion, Ms. Babb?
Yes, it goes back to what Mr. Watson was talking about originally. I think we do priorities, but I think the way this is presented, when we're trying to individually vote on it, I personally don't necessarily agree with every single one of these. Now, if the board goes through them all and votes for all of them, I will support what the board supports. But I would like us to vote individually on these because I do think there are different things, and I think we are just being given this as one big package. So I wanted to put forth an amendment which is a little different than his, because I don't necessarily have a problem with him amending this, but I would like to amend the way we vote on this, and that we vote on kind of each of these separately, so that if we don't, because I'll be honest, I sort of equate it to what we see in Congress when they shove things through, because one thing's popular. Like, I mean, I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think probably any of us disagree with full funding of, BEP and stuff. But I think there are individuals, and I think when it all comes in one thing, when we're just given one slate to vote on, and we all might be for every single one of these, but if the majority of us is not for all of these or one of these, does that make sense?
It does. The only problem is that you can't then call it legislative priorities because then it's just a loose group of resolutions. They would just be resolutions at that point.
Well, I guess
Right.
the way I think about it is, I almost would number them. Like, okay, say if there are 5 here, if we all vote, if the majority vote for all 5 of them, then they all go forward. If one of the 5, a majority of us does not vote for, then that one would be taken off the priorities, and the 4 would be presented as the package.
Okay.
You might personally not have voted for one of them, but as a body, that individual thing has been voted on by the majority. And it's just kind of like when we do resolutions, we don't always necessarily have 100% that vote for it, but as a board, we're all, and I think you kind of spoke to that earlier.
Well, I also think by doing it that way, it actually puts more weight behind it because the public understands, okay, all 9 of them really value this one, right? Whereas if you're just voting on the document as a whole, I think the public's smart enough to know that there's no way that if somebody says no, they mean no to the whole thing, right? So to me, it makes you mean more what you actually mean when you say it. So I'm good with that.
Well, I think you can, because I think you can, you may be able to vote on it, but I think it probably has to be I think it doesn't carry much weight as a list of priorities if it's not a list of priorities. So I think you lose the whole fact of having priorities if it's not a cohesive document. So it could be that you might be able to vote. We just looking at this, we could have 5 or 6 different votes here to determine that. But then I think you either have priorities or you don't, in my opinion. I don't think you can list a priority and say on school vouchers you had 8 out of 9 board members agree, or, I'm not sure.
No, I don't think, I think it's kind of like with a resolution. We don't send it with our vote.
Right.
It's like if on vouchers, if we have like a 7-2 vote, it goes forward as from the Board of Education. And I think that's how,
I think
when
it's
we make
possible.
votes, it's the majority rule on
Right.
things. And
so I think it's possible to vote on it individually. So let's have some more conversation.
I'd like to put it out there, and the majority of people might disagree with me. So.
Let's have some conversation.
Which it kind of brings up a different thing than him.
I would just like the history if anybody could speak to it, because other than Mr. McMillan, who is nice.
To what, ma'am?
to how we came to be doing this legislative priorities and sending this in, because what I was going to say is you've been here longer than I have.
Well, I have.
But in the time that I've been here, this is how we've done it. I don't know that we have to do it this way. I do think, to speak to Susan, everything I've always heard is that it needs to be, it doesn't have to be a 9-0 vote.
No.
But it is very important when it goes to Nashville that it appears to be a unified board on that. So if we want to do what Mr. Watson suggested and what Ms. Pebb suggested, I think going forward in future years, unless there's a reason not to do that, it would be better to do it in a smaller committee meeting that can be attended by all board members, open to the public, and then bring it to the board so that you have more of a consensus when it comes to the floor of this board than having to do an individual vote that night of each one of these, which appears very discombobulated to me and ununified. Now, if somebody, Mr. McMillan or Terry or Gary, somebody can speak to why we do this and how we've done it in the past, I would appreciate it, because
Well,
this is what I know.
I'll make a comment or two. Of course, the superintendent has been around and seen a lot of these since he's been involved
That's true.
over the years up here. But, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've always, at least since I came on the board, we've always been presented, with, they may have asked board members there's some things that you automatically want on the priority list. It's just a known. But then they take suggestions, and then we vote on it, and if you objected to something, then you voted against it. Ms. Bounds is right that it's stronger if it goes over there 9-0 as opposed to 8-1 or 7-2. And I think, excuse me, quite honestly, with the COVID and everything, they're not going to be focused that much this year. They're going to try to get through things as best they can. They're not going to be worried about what a priority of the school board in Knox County was in their consideration. Now, I'm not saying they won't look at it, Virginia, but, they're not going, it's not going to really have that much impact in my opinion. While I've got the floor, apparently, I want to make did I say anything that you disagreed with, Bob?
You did not, and
Okay.
I've seen it done both ways. I've seen it where at times the board secretary would take, board members would submit to the board secretary and then it would go through them. And then I've seen times when maybe it's a workshop devoted to developing this and then discuss it, and then everybody would come to agreement and it would be on the list. So I've seen it done both ways.
Yeah, and that's how this came about. We asked for feedback, and Ms. Owen provided some feedback. I'm not sure if anybody else did, but I know Ms. Owen provided some. I made a couple of alterations to last year, so that's what we've been doing the past handful of years. So
I guess it would just, I think it'd be nice, and I have to say, like last week, I was remote and didn't have any sound either, so I couldn't bring up stuff. But I do think it's one thing for different board members to have different priorities of their own, but then I do think there needs to be a time when we can have a discussion as a whole. Do we agree with Ms. Owen's priority, or maybe it's Ms. Bound's priority? I think we all have different things that go on, but I think it's hard when it all comes to us and it's a yay or nay on the whole thing when you might not agree with parts of it.
Well, if I could interject something. In the past, we've always been able to have some kind of meeting prior to the legislative session with the legislature.
legislators,
And
which we're planning to do.
a lot of stuff has come out of that. They can get a feel, this board split on this particular issue, so-and-so feels this way. And I think that's helped tremendously. Now, the chair is right in that sometimes things, even in the spring workshop, retreat, whatever, that it will start there with somebody mentioning it and carry over. But
And,
I don't think it's going to make that much.
well, I think you're right, Mr. McMillan. I think the meeting that we'll have with our legislative delegation in early January is going to be more productive than this anyway, but it's nice to have something that helps guide discussions. Ms. Bounds?
And I thought in the years past that really that was what this was developed for. It wasn't so much about sending it to Nashville. It was what we wanted to discuss with our legislators when we met prior to the January meeting. And that to a large point or part is determined by the board chair. Going back many years, the 2 years I served as chair, the chair before me, they developed with the input from the board, but they developed and they presented in various ways how that legislative meeting was conducted. And we've conducted it in different ways where the board chair just presented our concerns. But I never felt like this was such a weighty document that went to Nashville that we needed to do individual votes on. It was just like, here's some ideas that we want to discuss with our legislators when we get together in January, rather than just helter-skelter. So, I don't know.
I don't think they're spending a lot of time reading it, Ms. Bounds.
No, I don't think so either. And I think we're giving it way too much credit.
Okay.
I think you're exactly right, Ms. Bounds. And that's what we missed this year. In the past, I can almost assure you that when we had lunch or cookies and coffee or whatever we had, they will remember what was said there, whereas they may never even look at this.
I agree.
But what I wanted to say a moment ago was, we were talking about scores when John was up here, going back some years back. We had a discussion on the board several years ago about those scores, and it was some people might score, they might be a very good teacher, and they might score 3+ and near the 4, but they wouldn't ever be able to get to the 4 or to the 5. And there was pretty much of a consensus that wasn't a bad thing. That was just their style. They didn't have to make an A+ from their perspective. They just wanted everybody to appreciate and say that he or she was a quality teacher. So I don't know whether that helps anybody or not. But as far as the testing part, I will say this. This is my opinion. But at some point, I don't think that we will be able to put the legislature off much longer, no matter how much we protest. They are going to demand that students be evaluated and some form of it tied to the teacher's test score. That's just my opinion. But we haven't thus far. Something has happened every year that we've lost it. But it is coming, I feel sure. Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
McMillan. Okay, I want to make sure we get in the other people who have their mics down. Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, Ms. Bath, I agree with you about breaking it up. I would love to see it that way. And I don't know if this is an appropriate document that we could review in Policy Review Committee. I don't know, since the committee, or since the board is here as a whole, I don't know if that would be an appropriate place for that, but I do want to say that I agree with you and thank you for bringing this up.
Okay, Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would say that the process of approval, I believe, worked much better when we did it in fall workshops, the 2-day workshop, when we could talk about it and come to consensus. I think a lot of the language that is in this version of it came from those workshops. What we have here does align with everything we voted for with TSBA. And so that's important that our legislative priorities also align with other school boards in the state. There was a time historically when our document was important to have. And this is a personal story before I was a board member. I was in an education committee meeting, and one of the legislators read a letter from one of our board members, written on letterhead, that sounded like this board opposed something. But the legislative priorities, well, it sounded like they supported something. I'm sorry, I'm backwards. It sounded like this board was in support of what this legislator was trying to pass. But the legislative priorities of this board said otherwise. And having this document and being able to send that to someone else on the committee, they were able to say, but wait, the Knox County priorities say this. And that can be really important in a deliberative session when you have one person making it sound like boards in the state support something that they don't. And when other people on the committee can look and see that, you know, the facts, it's important that they can have those facts in front of them. So even though we may not feel like it gets any traction anywhere, and it doesn't feel like it is given much weight by our legislators, I think it's important for them to have it in writing so that they can see exactly what is true. Thank you, Madam
Good
Chair.
point. Thank you. Ms. Christie?
Yeah, back to the substitute motion. We do these every year, correct? I mean, so I do think that the situation with the pandemic needs to be the priority. I mean, let's face it, there are some people that are never going to agree with decoupling teacher evaluations from student testing. But they might agree this year to do that, first of all. And, you know, I don't think that teachers don't want to be held accountable either. I mean, they want a fair system, which obviously there's a lot of problems with the current system. But I do like what Mr. Watson has done here as far as making the language specifically related to COVID-19 in this year, because this year, more than ever, we need this to happen. And I prefer for the focus to be this year. I mean, next year we can go back and revisit it and talk about it and do it however everybody wants. I do think that this year the focus needs to be on what we need now.
Thank you, Ms. Christie. Mr. Watson?
Mr. Thomas, so on the agenda, obviously, it says that these are recommended by the superintendent. So obviously, there would be the board's legislative priorities, but you have some stake in it, and you have some thoughts about it. Can I ask your thoughts about the relative importance about lifting the priority around holding teachers harmless in light of COVID-19?
We had just a couple of days ago, a superintendent study council meeting, and when I say that, that's a group of superintendents made up of surrounding counties and so forth. And superintendent study council has a priority list as well. This is on that list too, and what the superintendents were asking for was a 1-year hold harmless. I think that's consistent with the resolution that the board approved, the language we had in the resolution last month, I believe. So I think our thought pattern was, best chance of getting something is to put a time frame on it, like the 2021 school year, because I think a bigger discussion around evaluation probably is a whole nother issue, I guess, that the legislators may want to discuss at some point. So again, our thought and the superintendent's thoughts are, hey, if we can get our legislators to give us this on a 1-year hold harmless, that would be what we would ask for. So, but again, there's been lots of discussion about this, and I think it's a bigger issue than what we can make it at this point, I think. So I'm happy with the resolution that the board approved in November, because that's what we drafted. I know John was involved, and Ron and some other, and Gary, I think, some other folks involved in that. So again, the superintendents were asking for a 1-year hold harmless. So that's kind of my thoughts about it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ms. Babb, you had your mic down, and Mr. McMillan.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe my individual, I don't know that there's traction for that. I would like us to maybe look at next year how we could do it. My thing is I totally support the whole teachers harmless this year. I think the decoupling of assessments, I think that's a much bigger discussion around evaluations overall, and I don't know that I support the first part of this. I totally support the whole teachers harmless, and that's probably my biggest issue. But I do know that there are other people on this board that feel differently about vouchers and different other things about it, so that's kind of why I wanted to break it down. But my specific issue is on this, I really would like to keep it COVID-19 specific for what we know the legislature is going to deal with, what we think is realistic to get through with them. And I fully support that hold teachers harmless part that we've already done a resolution, whereas I do have issues with the part at the in front of that, even with Mr. Watson's revisions.
So to clarify, you would prefer that we take out the whole paragraph and only have the hold teachers harmless section?
That would be my preference, but that's not the amendment that's
okay. I'm just making sure I understand your.
But I just kind of
process.
wanted to put forward kind of my particular reason why I wanted to break this down. But if we're not going to, I kind of wanted to state what my issue was.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to see that too. I think it just makes it a shorter document and makes our needs for this year pretty clear and to the point.
Okay, Mr. McMillan, did you have a comment?
Well, I guess I've got a question. Now, when you talk about taking out the paragraph, are you talking about taking out everything from where it says local controls of schools, all of that, or are you talking about where it says teacher performance evaluation, or school vouchers, everything after school voucher? What are you talking about?
Personally, what I would like to see, but this is different than what Mr. Watson has put forward. Mr. Watson's done what is in red right here. What I would prefer is to take out, have the title teacher performance evaluation, and then from the Knox County Board of Education, that paragraph down to additionally student testing, that taken out, and our priority this year being about holding teachers harmless this year during COVID as far as decoupling the testing. I mean, that's my preference.
You want to, I'm not sure I understand, Ms. Bev, exactly what you want to do. You want to take out just from right here,
Take out all of
the whole,
everything except this part right here, starting right there. This would be it.
that would be what you take out? Okay. What would be included?
This would be left.
All
Everything
this,
above that to right here would be.
okay, from teacher performance now. Okay, I can live with that. Is there anybody that objects to any of the first 4 bullets? I guess we should ask that.
Well, I know, I think, okay, to back up just a little bit, I think I think the consensus that I'm hearing is that we feel like we need to fix this document this evening, because if we want legislative priorities that we can discuss in January, today's our day. So we need to fix this document so that we're all happy with it. Next year going forward, we need to make sure that we have on our fall retreat agenda this topic, so we can make sure that you bring your ideas and we can hammer out what we want it to say, so that when we could pass it, in November next year. And I think we all agree it's important that we have this document, because even though I think Ms. Owen said it well, even if they're not going to read it, at least you have it and we can speak. If we don't have this, none of us can speak on behalf, except for the chair, can speak on behalf of this board. And I don't think that we want that. I think we need every one of us to be empowered to be able to speak on behalf of this board. But you can only do that if you have this document. So let's focus. So currently, to make sure we're on the same page, we have a substitute motion with this, right? So, Mr. Watson?
I'm okay with adjusting my substitute motion
Okay,
and going with the suggestion that Ms. Babb offered.
okay.
Although, just for consistency, I would like to change under school vouchers, the Knox County Board of Education. When we say the board, I think we need to be specific.
Well, I don't think that's a substantive change,
Well,
so I think we
I'm
can
just-
change that without a vote. So I think that's fine.
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Do we really need anything from, could we not just drop school vouchers down to that last line? It says, hold teachers harmless.
Well, I tell you what, I would, if we want
Because
to
that,
change
that's,
something,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
we could actually move, so that we are focusing on COVID, we could actually move the local control of schools up to under funding for public education, move that up a little bit, and then you have the listing of the BEP formula issues, and then so that immediately following that would be the hold teachers harmless section, and then move vouchers down to under that. Just kind of rearrange it
Well, what
so
if-
that our priorities are more reflective of the current situation.
There might be some division on vouchers. Do you want to really try to put that in there, or would you be willing to just, that was what I thought this year, it would be better just to include, do what you said, but just move the whole teachers harmless down there in red, the last part, right above, the sentence right above school grading, move it up to under the hold harmless BEP funding, or under local control schools, wherever y'all want to put it. But I don't think we need to talk about school vouchers in general if we're not going to talk about teacher performance. But, I mean, I think they kind of, I think
they're
there's,
totally different subjects.
I
well,
think they're different subjects. Yeah.
they are different, but some of the board might not be comfortable about talking about the vouchers, or might not vote for it if it did include what the statement here about the voucher.
Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to take that out. You know, we can all
Well-
voice concern and be opposed to vouchers if you want to individually, but if you take that out, then, and move that up just for this year, would that not take care of things?
Possibly. I think, do we think that there would be, I wouldn't think that vouchers will be an issue. Will they be this year, you think, Ms. Owen?
Yes, they will be. I would also say that local control of schools, the reason that is pulled out and separate is because there are legislators who want to remove all local boards of education.
No, I didn't mean for it to come out. I just
Right,
meant move that.
I'm
like, still-
just addressing what you said about moving it up under something else.
Well, no, but it would be its own thing still.
Right.
I'm just saying move this whole section
right.
as it is,
I
not
just
changing.
want everybody to understand that there are legislators who do want to do away with all local boards and control everything at the state level. So it's important that that can stand alone wherever it may be.
No, I was not saying it shouldn't. I just said it should move up. So
Would this all be easier if I just went back and accepted that friendly amendment?
It looks pretty good right
I
now.
think we're past that, so.
I was still going to make my comment.
Okay, let's get some calm here. Ms. Bounds?
Well, I was just going to say, going all the way back, Daniel, I do like and I understand where Ms. Owen's coming from, because we both come out of the teaching profession and we see the harm. But I do like for the 2021 school year that you offered as a friendly amendment, and I like, Ms. Horn, what you said about moving it up, because I think that needs to be a top priority for this board, for our teaching profession, that they are held harmless for this year, and we'll fight the bigger fight down the road. I will say that, we have a whole position so school vouchers have not gone away. They still are tied up in the courts right now, it's my understanding, but we have created a whole position in Nashville for a former legislator in regard to his working on school vouchers. So it has not gone away. It is stronger than ever, and I feel like, next year we can go through it in the fall workshop and do as Ms. Babb and Ms. Henderson and Mr. Watson suggested, and go through and, vote individually, fine-tune this document before it ever comes to this floor. But I do think for this year that we can move it down, doesn't have to be at the top. What concerns me more than vouchers almost is the A through F grading of public schools. But that hasn't even been discussed, and that's a huge issue. But I do think the hold teachers harmless needs to be at the top as much as possible. And I support getting rid of that paragraph this year if it offends 3 or 4 or 5 board members on this board. We can fight that fight down the road, but I know there's a lot of teachers out there that,
I agree. I agree with that, Ms. Bounds. I think right now we need to make sure that that we're holding teachers harmless currently. So I would agree with that. I would be okay with getting rid of that paragraph and then moving it up. So is that your friendly amendment?
Yep.
Okay, so could I propose this? Well, you would have to propose it as a friendly amendment.
Yes.
The moving the local control of schools up so that section is kind of the second bullet, second bold, and then putting school vouchers toward the bottom, either above or below grading, school
So my
grading.
friendly amendment that was a substitute is now going to be friendly again. And so my friendly amendment is to move the section that says local control of schools directly above the section that says Knox County Board of Education urges the General Assembly to amend the BEP formula. And then the second piece of my friendly amendment would be to strip the paragraph under teacher performance evaluations from the words the Knox County Board of Education to the words unreliable in both execution and delivery of scores, to strip that piece of the paragraph and then bring the teacher performance evaluation section up above school vouchers.
Okay. And let me think. We need a second on that.
Second.
Okay, Ms. Babb is seconded. Okay, Mr. McMillan, did you have a comment?
Well, no, not exactly, but I guess it's more of a question. But you're going to leave school vouchers in it?
That is his motion.
That's my suggestion as a friendly amendment.
Well, under teacher performance, you want Knox County Board of Ed, and then where do you want to go to from there?
Would it help if I labeled the sections in order as I'm proposing them? So section number 1 would be local control of schools. Section number 2 would be the Knox County Board of Education urges the General Assembly. Section number 3 would be teacher performance evaluations. Section number 4 would be school vouchers, and section number 5 would be school grading.
But you're also under teacher performance evaluation getting rid of.
Stripping that paragraph. I was just trying to address the order.
Okay. Was that clear?
So what are we gonna vote on? We're gonna vote on?
We're voting on, that's what
Substitute?
we're voting on. So unless we have other questions, we're ready to vote.
We're gonna vote on a substitute?
We're voting on the friendly substitute motion, yes, whatever it's called. Ms. Henderson?
I'm sorry, I just have a question. So what we're voting on right now is the amendment, and then another vote for the full document.
The amendment on the floor was changed to a substitute motion, so you'd just be voting on a substitute motion. That would
It
get rid of the
becomes the
original.
new motion, since it's a substitute.
So there'll be one vote on this document, not two.
Mr. Duper, is that correct? No, that's not at all.
That's correct. So the most recent, substitute motion that was just described by Mr. Watson is what you're voting on. And if 5 or more vote for that, then this board's done. If it's voted down, then you go back to the original, which is what is printed on the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Appreciate that. Okay, so I think we're ready to vote. Mr. McMillan, are you good?
No, I'm ready.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. Could we have a roll call?
We can have a roll call, absolutely. Ms. Coatney?
Ms. Satterfield?
Aye.
Ms. Owen?
Aye.
Mr. Watson?
Aye.
Ms. Babb?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
No.
Ms. Bounds?
Aye.
Mr. McMillan?
No.
Ms. Christie? Ms. Horn?
Aye. Okay, 7-2, so we have a 7-2 motion carries. So Ms. Coatney will rework this as Mr. Watson's motion, and we will then be able to go forward and have conversations based on this document. I've already talked to some of the delegation about meeting in January, so we will likely, they will go back into session January 12th, I believe it is. So hopefully the week prior to that, possibly on January 8th, we'll try to schedule some time. So if you can tentatively block off January 8th, we'll try to let you know as soon as possible if that will work. And that will be, we've done, I mean, I know Mr. McMillan and Ms. Bounds have been to several of these, and I've been to several now, and truly the best is when it's the best ones we've had have been very informal, and so that's what our goal will be as informal as possible. Last year was not even informal enough, in my opinion, so.
Sometimes they get a little fiery, but
They're always friendly.
They're always
Informed.
friendly and informative. You get to know where different people stand. I think I've missed one maybe in the years that I've been
It's always
on.
productive, so I would encourage everyone to try to be there. Okay, and now we are ready to move to the added agenda item, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Discussion of possibility of moving to electronic meetings if governor extends order past December 2020.
Okay, Mr. Watson.
So now you all are regretting letting me add this to the agenda after I took up all that time. I do have a prepared statement. This is a statement that I think you all will have seen, but I know we're, especially given Dr. Buchanan being here tonight, we're all aware of the unfolding situation regarding COVID-19 in our community. All of the key metrics regarding the pandemic from the Knox County Health Department are currently read. We have seen the Board of Health take action to mandate limiting groups gatherings of 10 or less when members of that group are not from the same household. Knox County has been in the red zone according to the White House Coronavirus Task Force since November 29th. Given our current situation locally, I'd like the board to have discussion and consider moving its monthly workshops and meetings virtually should the governor extend Order 65, I believe, past December 27th. I'm not making this recommendation out of fear, but I believe it is the best interest in our community. To date, 189, this was been as of 2 days ago, 189 of our Knox County neighbors have died from COVID, and our medical professionals are overwhelmed. As leaders and elected officials, we know it's incumbent for us to lead out of example. I believe that this is the right example for us to set for our community. This decision is also in line with decisions KCS and other elected bodies have made recently. On 11/19, KCS staff reinforced guidance from our own workforce management plan, asking that all meetings regarding KCS business to occur virtually whenever possible. Our own DEO's public meeting this Thursday will also be virtual. Other local elected bodies have recently taken the same action. This week, in fact, County Commission decided to move their December meetings to virtual, while the City Council, Board of Health, UT Board of Trustees, and the Knox County Planning Commission have all been meeting virtually since March. And I know that we all feel more connected as a body. I certainly feel that and appreciate the opportunity to be with you all, and I know the body language helps me a ton. But I don't think that's enough of a reason for us to continue to do so in light on the unfolding situation. I also feel strongly that should we choose and are able to hold virtual meetings, that we do keep intact public forum and find a way to do that in a virtual setting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Watson. Ms. Owen, did you have a comment on that?
Oh, no, sorry.
Ms. Babb?
I just have one question. How indefinitely are you asking for it, or till metrics change, or what
So
is your?
I'm not making a proposal, because I don't think, this is our last meeting in December, and we don't know what the governor's going to do. So I wanted to bring it up as a point of discussion to see how the board feels about that as a whole. So that way, should the governor extend it, we can act on it and not come to in-person meetings again when we don't intend to make a decision or to feel if that's something we want to do as a board. So I'm really trying to get a feel of the room to see if that's the direction we would want to move should the governor extend his order.
Okay, Ms. Bounds?
So it's all, Mr. Watson, it's all contingent upon what the governor decides at the end of the month.
No, I don't think it's contingent, but we can't, from what I understand, Mr. Dupler, we can't make the decision to have virtual meetings past December 27th because the governor's order would not allow for that. So I don't think we make our decisions based on the governor's order, but we're limited in the decisions we can make when the order expires.
Mr. Dupler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Watson. Yes, Mr. Watson's correct. He and I discussed this, briefly before this meeting, and that is a limiting factor because normally this board would be required to meet in person and have a quorum and what have you. So this executive order has been in effect for most of the year at this point. And if it's extended, then this board would still have the opportunity to appear virtually. Otherwise, there's a board policy on it and state law, and it's very specific, usually for work or for illness or something of that nature.
Thank you, Mr. Dupler. Mr. McMillan?
Yes. I guess this is for you, Mr. Watson. Students return, assuming that that they're able to. If they're not in this last round, they return on what? June 6th?
January
8th, what?
5th or 6th?
I mean, January 6th? Okay.
5th, I think.
Are you still in favor if the majority of schools are open and in doing this virtual meeting for the board?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that comment, Mr. McMillan, and that question. So I think we have way less variables and limitations to conduct our business in a virtual environment than students do. And so I don't want to make decisions about how this board operates based upon how our Knox County school systems is operating, because it's a different function. We're a policy-making body that I think can more easily do our work in a virtual space. I know it's difficult. I was on a virtual meeting for the Knox County Joint Education Task Force this past Monday, and it was not fun. Of course, it wasn't Zoom. Not everybody was there. I was just the only one virtual. And so I get the frustrations with it.
Well, let me ask you another question. Just for argument's sake, let's assume that things get better, and I guess we won't know until schools are either able to reopen or one day, and we'll see what it's like for a day or two. But do you not think that we're a little bit different from the commission and some of these other boards? Do you not think that it would be hypocritical for us to open the schools and then for us to do virtual?
Yes, sir. I appreciate that question as well. So I think I appreciate the bringing up the possibility of hypocrisy. I think I want to point us back to on 11/19, we all received an email saying and stating that KCS staff is reinforcing guidance related to our own approved workforce management plan, asking that all meetings regarding KCS business, which we're in the process of conducting, to occur virtually whenever possible. And my feeling in that is it is possible for us to meet virtually, and we should honor what we're asking in terms of the way we conduct business type of meetings.
Well, then when would it end?
Mr. McMillan, I don't have the information to decide that, and it's not my decision. That's why I wanted to bring it up for a point of discussion with the board to hear what other people are thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's the decision of the executive committee, so the point of the conversation would really just be to get feedback, and then the superintendent and I would make that decision. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Mr. McMillan's stance on the precedence that it can send if we do have schools open. With us not being here, I also understand the perspective of the meeting aspect that was there, but I think that personally, I would love to just be on Zoom, but I do think that if we are having our teachers go to work every single day, then we need to show up as well. So depending on what happens, that's where I personally stand.
Thank you, Ms. Satterfield. Ms. Fab, I think you were next.
I think I'm in agreement with Ms. Satterfield. I totally appreciate Mr. Watson's discussion of it, because I think we've got two opposing issues going on. There is public safety. There is the following, trying to be as safe as possible, trying to keep as many people as safe as possible. But I do hate to be a Board of Education of our schools that is not willing to meet in person, but yet we're wanting our teachers, principals, administrators to be in the classroom. So I fully appreciate what you're saying, but I'm really torn about it because now I will put this caveat. If in January our schools are virtual, then I think I would have a different feel about it. But I think if our schools are in person, I feel like we need to set the example of being in person.
Ms. Bounds?
Yes, thank you. Since you're trying to get a feel as
Yes,
you all
thank
meet
you.
as an executive committee, I would agree with Ms. Satterfield and Mr. McMillan and Ms. Babb. And I do think while a lot of the other bodies of Knox County are doing virtual, I do think we are a little bit different as the school system, and we don't have to fall under their guidelines. So I do think, as Ms. Bev said, if we're virtual in January, then that's an entirely different matter. But if the schools are open and we're expecting teachers and students to be there, then I think we need to meet as a board.
Thank you, Ms. Bounds. Ms. Owen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've heard a lot of concern from teachers who are saying, why is the board meeting in person when we are being told not to meet in person? And looking at that, they feel that same idea that there is hypocrisy there. So I think it's important that we carefully consider the example that we're setting, whether we are truly following the guidelines that have been given. If Knox County Schools Administration says no more than 10 should be meeting, then clearly we are not following those guidelines ourselves. And so it's difficult to ask our schools to enforce something that we are ignoring ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owen. Okay. Just my vote, I think we're much more productive when we're in person. I think tonight's conversation would have been extremely difficult to have over Zoom because it's just not the same. So, and my gut feeling is that if we're expecting our teachers to be in the building, that we ought to be able to be in person as well. And I would concur, if we're on red, then we can, that may be a different conversation. And we have a 48-hour notice, so we can decide up to 48 hours prior to our meetings whether we're going to move the venue or not, because that would be the public notice deadline. So we can be flexible to a point. Mr.
Sure,
Watson.
and I appreciate the line that you guys are bringing out. I do think, as Ms. Owen said, that we do have to acknowledge that we have asked teachers not to gather for the purpose of simply conducting business. And so, right now we're kind of cutting the lines between functions. And so in one hand, we're saying, don't meet virtually if you're going to do this. And then we're saying, to teach students in person, you obviously have to be in person. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but what I'm saying is, I don't know that the decision of the board to meet in person to conduct business is as clear as we're expecting our teachers to teach in person, so.
Ms. Bounds?
We might want to ask the superintendent and his staff to go back and revisit that, because when I got those guidelines about what was virtual and what was not virtual, I had a lot of questions in my own mind, because having taught on a staff of a school that had like 90 staff people, I could totally understand not holding a faculty meeting in person with 100 people crammed into the library. But, and I don't know, Mr. Roswick probably could go back and they could look at this, but, you know, I've also heard from parents that were very upset that they were having to do virtual IEPs when that could be no more than 5 or 6 people in the room. So I think it's a larger question that maybe the superintendent and his staff need to look at before January as to clarification, and maybe it was just on my part, I didn't understand. But, you know, there's all kinds of meetings that happen throughout the school day. So I understand the intent for people to minimize their meetings, because if anybody knows how many meetings a teacher can attend in a week, I do, and some I find less than necessary. But still, you know, there's a big variance there. So that would just be my question as to looking at that, revisiting that again.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that. I think that we need to be able to trust our staff to make decisions for themselves. And so if we have principals who deem, and I agree, not too many meetings because they need to be focusing on what they do, but if there's a meeting that needs to be had, if they have an auditorium that seats 300 and they need to put 50 teachers in there, then I think they ought to be able to do that. So I would also appreciate relooking at that guidance and trusting our teachers and our principals to be able to make those decisions for what's best in their building, if they're able to, you know, distance and whatever. So I would be in favor of that also. Okay, anything else? Okay, so we will, let me see. I think we have public forum next. Okay, Ms. Babb, we have public forum. Thank you.
We have one person on public forum that we'll see if they've been patient enough to go through all these discussions. Ms. Desiree Dale. Is Desiree Dale here? Oh, great. Hi, just to let you know, if you'll state your name, county of residence, and then you'll have 5 minutes to speak.
My name is Desiree Dale, and I'm a resident of Knox County. And I'm also a teaching assistant in CDCA classroom in Knox County schools. I'm here today to talk about the role of uniformed officers in our schools and the safety of our children. My oldest son has a diagnosis of level 2 autism, which is defined as requiring substantial support. He's often seen as a high-functioning child with autism, but his level of autism affects his ability to regulate his emotions on his own. He has required a large amount of support throughout his educational years. On September 4th, just 9 short days into his freshman year of high school, an incident occurred that will forever change his course of education. That morning, my son had become agitated in his special education classroom. The school administration was called to the room, and this school has a protocol of bringing their KPD officer with them to any administration call. Within 5 minutes, the administration left, believing my child was at baseline, even though we know 5 minutes is not an adequate amount of time for this to happen. After she left, my son quickly became upset again. He then got to his highest state of crisis. His fight or flight mode kicked in very quickly, and he picked up a stool and began verbally threatening staff. But at this point, I'm told that the school's KPD officer heard what was happening from the hallway and entered the classroom. My son has always been fearful of law enforcement, so in his heightened state, seeing the officer only escalated the situation further. The officer removed the chair from my son's hands. My son hit him. And with his history of aggressive behaviors when he is in crisis, these behaviors are usually handled by a crisis team and would have warranted my son being safely restrained at that time. But instead, the KPT officer immediately put my son in handcuffs and told him, "You're going to jail." My 14-year-old child, who was still in crisis, was unable to comply in that moment. The officer began to walk my son to the police car, and he went to his knees in the hallway. I have seen the school security footage myself, and when my son went to his knees, the KPT officer proceeded to drag him on his stomach for approximately 15 feet until my son stood up. Once my son stood, the officer held his arms at a very awkward angle in the handcuffs, put him in the back of the police car, and sat for 20 minutes before taking him to the juvenile detention center and charging my son with assault. That was when I received a phone call for the first time that day from the school. I was told to meet my son at the juvenile center, and my 14-year-old special needs child sat in a juvenile cell for an hour. When I emailed Knox County staff for help, the thing I heard over and over again was that, quote, KCS does not oversee the KPD officers that are assigned to individual schools, and that, quote, KCS does not have control over when or how a law enforcement officer decides to place a student in handcuffs and/or under arrest. And I was told that any questions I had should be addressed to KPD only. But why should an officer step into a special education classroom and police a student during a situation that even the school agrees happened because of behaviors related to his disability? And how would parents feel knowing that Knox County school employees have no control over how that went, and no one stopped it because they were told not to interfere if KPD steps in? How would other parents of special needs children feel knowing that these officers have little to no training with our children of different abilities, yet have the capability to step into our children's special education classrooms and take over in a crisis situation? Our school security officers are not even allowed to restrain special needs students in any way, including handcuffs. However, a KPD school officer does not have to go by these same rules. A person in uniform who doesn't know our children's most sacred information, their legally binding IEP, can step in and take over in their most vulnerable moment. We can't change what happened on September 4th. I had to take a leave of absence from work. I'm helping my family work through therapy, court dates, and trauma and anxiety that our 14-year-old is struggling with daily. But my goal is to see the school board put policies in place so that we never see this happen to another special needs student. I'm asking the board to revisit the MOA you have with law enforcement, consider changes, including more specific training for the officers, appropriate interactions with all students, and specifically special needs students, and accountability from KCS before law enforcement is allowed to become involved. Thank you for listening.
Ms. Dale, thank you for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll move to board forum. Do we have anyone would like to speak for board forum this evening? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, wait. Did somebody want to?
Yes, I'm sorry. I know
I'm sorry.
talked a lot. I just want to acknowledge what the news that we all got. Parents everywhere across Knox County are trying to figure out what to do Monday, and also want to thank our staff. I know that's no easy decision. I know that you all wrestled with that for a very long time, and I also know that feelings are very up and down across our county. I mean, I heard just from today in that 10-minute window from coming in this room to the time it was announced, I had one person in tears call me, and I had another person say this was the best decision we could have made. And I think it's important for us as a community to acknowledge that different people are experiencing this different ways, and that we need to honor those emotions that people are feeling because they're real. So.
Very good point. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.